Hello, I'm Holly, and today I've got my April wrap-up. So April was the Magical Readathon, which is a readathon hosted by G at Book Roast. And it's based on Harry Potter. You're completing your owls, which are like the wizarding exams, and you have to do certain owls to get a certain career. I was going for the librarian career, and I was able to get all the owls that I needed for that. And the beginning of April went really well for me. I ended up reading about 6 books in the first half of the month. And I've actually done a mid-month wrap-up. If you're interested in that, I'll link it below. But the second half of the month did not go as well. In terms of like quantity, I ended up reading 3 more books, which I'm still happy about. That works out at 9 books in a month, which is still something I'm really happy about. But that does mean we're only going to be talking about 3 books today. And my stats, I am including my monthly stats in this as well if you're interested. So these were the 9 books that I read. I've talked about the ones up to here, I think, and these 3 are the ones I'm talking about today. And let's get into my stats. Like I said, I read 9 books, which worked out at 3,578 pages and an average of 119 pages per day. I'm really happy with that. That is more than last month, and I was reading a lot of longer books. I would say like 400 plus pages this month, whereas last month I was reading a lot of 100 to 300 page books. And if we look at star rating, I had 2 3 stars, 5 4 stars, and 2 5 stars with an average star rating of 4. Again, I'm pretty happy with that. I enjoyed a massive amount of the books that I read this month. And then in genre, I read 1 historical fiction, 3 fantasy, 3 science fiction dystopian, and 2 poetry essay collections, which were actually by the same author. So quite a mix. I did read more than just fantasy, although I will say those 3 science fiction dystopian reads were the Hunger Games trilogy, which I reread this month. I got a whole vlog coming about that. Hopefully soon. I really quite like that vlog. There are a lot of tears, so look out for that if you're interested. And then in page count, I read 2 books that were in the 100 to 200 range, 1 book that was in the 300 to 400 range, 5 books in the 400 to 500 range, and 1 book over 600 pages. And then in demographic, I had 4 YA, 5 adults. In format, again, I only read print books, 7 paperbacks and 2 hardbacks. And then finally for source, 7 of the books were from my own TBR before 2020 and 2 of them I'd hauled this year. So those were all of my stats. And then if we get into the 3 extra books that I read this month, the first of those is She Must Be Mad by Charlie Cox. This is Charlie Cox's first book. It's kind of a collection of poetry, there's prose in here, like little stories, and it's very much about mental health, about relationships. This was 4 Potions, which was a book under 150 pages, and I did enjoy this. There were a few poems that I really connected with, but most of the poems in here just didn't do it for me. I just didn't really click with them. Even the ones about mental health, which I was really excited to read because that's something that I've struggled with. Even I didn't really gel with. I also think that some of the lines in here were really cheesy, and I do appreciate that this is her first collection. Some of these poems she wrote when she was a teenager, but I wonder if I can find the line. It literally, you know, when it's just so cringy. So this is from Funny. I feel funny. Not like when the light bounces from the sky and you feel heat stroke from the sunny. And it goes on, that line. And that's not to say that I didn't think it was good. I think if poetry is something that you really love and you read a lot of, this is definitely one that's worth picking up. Charlie Cox really goes deep into her life. It's very raw and real, and she's really putting herself on the page and opening up, which is something I really respect. I think she did a great job of opening up and talking about the things that she's been through. There wasn't anything I particularly disliked, so I ended up rating this 3 stars. I don't know if I'll read any more Charlie Cox. I just don't know if poetry is my thing. I've never really loved any kind of modern poetry collection. I haven't read that many, but I don't know if it's my thing. If you have any great recommendations for poetry collections, I'd love to hear. And then the next book I read was the one that took me most of the rest of the month. If I hadn't put this on my TBR, I might have been able to read a few more books, complete a few more of the subjects, but that book is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J Maas. This is the second book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and it follows a girl called Feyre, whose family are really poor, and because of this she has to hunt to provide for them. At the beginning of the first book, she ends up killing a wolf, which was actually a fae, and one of his friends turns up on the doorstep demanding that she pay with her life and come and live in the land of Fae for the rest of it. The main girl, Feyre, goes through a lot in the first book, and something that I really enjoyed with this one is you are seeing the repercussions of those events. Feyre at the beginning of this one is really struggling. She has nightmares, flashbacks. She's really suffering from the after effects of what happened to her. Her relationship with Tamlin, the love interest in the first book, is maybe not as perfect as she thought it was. And I really appreciate that Sarah J Maas did that. I think in a lot of books you have the love interest and they're the love interest throughout the whole series. They're forever in love, nothing can go wrong, but this one was very realistic, showing how relationships can peak and that they can fail, and that you can move on and fall in love with someone else. Who was the highlight of this book? Rhysand. I love Rhysand, okay? Rhysand. In this one you're exploring a whole different court, which is the Night Court, and I really, really loved that. I loved the relationship between Feyre and Rhysand and the Night Court. I don't really want to spoil what happens or the journey that Feyre goes through, but the relationship between these two characters was perfect. One of my favourite things in romance is slow burn, and I don't even think they kiss until like that far through, and every scene when they're like this close to kissing and they don't, I was just like, they're like, no. You do get the payoff though in that last section of the book. It gets a bit steamy and I appreciated that. I just really, really loved this. I ended up giving this 5 stars, and did it deserve to be 5 stars? I don't know, but I'm giving it 5 stars. My emotional response to this was so strong. I just really, really loved it. You're also introduced to a host of new characters, Rhysand's inner circle, and I really loved them too. I think the banter in this, the dynamics between all these different people, it was just top notch. Sarah J Maas really can do characters and character relationships. I was just transported there. I was so in this story and it was just delicious. It was intoxicating. Maybe it was a little long, but feelings were felt, tears were shed, and for me it was a 5-star read. And then the final book that I read in the month of April was Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. This is a fantasy kind of following this angel and a demon who've misplaced the Antichrist. The apocalypse is looming. They really need to find the Antichrist to try and stop the apocalypse from happening. And the reason that I read this is because I watched the TV show quite recently and I absolutely loved that. David Tennant and Michael Sheen were the demon and the angel and they were just fantastic. And I don't know why I thought this book would be like really different from the TV show, but it's not. The show did a fantastic job of adapting this work. It really hits, the humour, the scenes in it, the characters, all of that got translated really well into the show. And the humour in this is really British, I would say. I don't know if people from other countries would really get certain references, but as a Brit myself, I really did. I really enjoyed this. I think if you loved the show, you'd really enjoy this. It's very close. Or if you've been interested in the show or the book, I would highly recommend you pick it up. It might not be your thing. I think it has a very specific sense of humour, and maybe it's not going to gel with everyone, but it did really gel with me. And I think my only criticism is the ending, and this was the same for the show. Obviously the show replicated what was in the book, but after this massive build-up, the angel and the demon, Aziraphale and Crowley, are trying to stop the apocalypse, and all your other characters are kind of coalescing in this one place. And it's a little bit anticlimactic, you know, you're kind of expecting some massive, not battle, but I don't know, something that would just hit you a bit harder, and it doesn't really do that. I just didn't particularly like the ending, but as a whole I gave this 4 stars. Also, this was my History of Magic prompt, which was a book featuring wizards or witches. So those were all the books that I read in April. If you do want to find out what I thought about these 6 books, I'll link my mid-month wrap-up down below. So, Good Omens was my History of Magic prompt. Caught in Mist and Fury was Transfiguration. She Must Be Mad was Potions. Validate Me was my Arithmancy. The Hunger Games was Care of Magical Creatures, an animal with a beak on the cover. Catching Fire was Defense Against the Dark Arts. Mockingjay was Herbology. And The Foundling was Ancient Runes, and then I also finished Call Down the Hawk. Oh dear. So those were all the books that I read. I know that I only talked about 3 books in this. I did expect to read a few more, but it didn't happen. I hope you enjoyed it anyway, and thank you for watching, and to everyone out there, stay curious. Bye!